My wife's work colleagues kept pressuring her to have an affair with her boss because he's wealthy and could upgrade her life, claiming I was holding her back and she deserved better. They said a smart woman would secure her future and that marriage vows were just paper. When I found their group chat encouraging her to cheat, I decided to show them exactly what kind of future they were really encouraging. I am 29M and my wife Sarah is 27F. We have been married for 3 years and together for 6 years total. I work as an electrician and Sarah works as a marketing coordinator at a high-end consulting firm downtown. We have a good marriage, own a modest home, and are saving to start a family soon. About 8 months ago, Sarah got a new boss named Richard who is 45M. Richard is recently divorced, extremely wealthy, and according to Sarah, quite charming and attractive. He drives expensive cars, wears designer suits, and frequently talks about his luxury lifestyle including his penthouse apartment and vacation homes. From the beginning, it was obvious that Richard was interested in Sarah beyond a professional relationship. He would compliment her appearance, invite her to business dinners that seemed unnecessary, and give her expensive gifts like designer scarves and jewelry under the guise of rewarding her good work. Sarah always told me about these interactions and we would laugh about her boss's obvious attempts to impress her. She would show me the gifts and we would joke about how inappropriate it was for a boss to give such personal presents to an employee. Sarah never seemed interested in Richard romantically and always maintained appropriate boundaries. The real problem started with Sarah's female colleagues at the company. There are 4 other women in Sarah's department: Michelle, Jessica, Amanda, and Lisa. These women are all single, ranging in age from 28 to 35, and they have very different perspectives on relationships and marriage than Sarah and I do. These colleagues started commenting on Richard's obvious interest in Sarah and began encouraging her to take advantage of the situation. They would make comments like, "Girl, he is loaded and clearly wants you and you could have a completely different life if you played your cards right." At first, Sarah would laugh off these comments and tell her colleagues that she was happily married. But the women became more persistent and started questioning why Sarah would stay faithful to me when she could have access to Richard's wealth and lifestyle. According to Sarah, Michelle was the ringleader of these conversations. Michelle had apparently had several relationships with wealthy men and believed that women should prioritize financial security over emotional connection. She would tell Sarah stories about expensive trips, designer clothes, and luxury apartments that came with dating successful men. The colleagues began pointing out everything they saw as inadequate about our lifestyle. They would comment on Sarah's modest jewelry, her older car, and her clothes from regular stores rather than designer boutiques. They made her feel like she was settling for less than she deserved by staying married to an electrician instead of pursuing a relationship with her wealthy boss. These women also started attacking our marriage directly. They would tell Sarah that marriage vows were just paper and that smart women understood when to upgrade their situation. They said I was holding her back from reaching her full potential and that she owed it to herself to explore what Richard could offer. Michelle told Sarah that she was being naive and that most married women would jump at the chance to secure a relationship with someone like Richard. She said Sarah should think about her future and what kind of life she wanted to have 10 or 20 years from now. The colleagues also began creating opportunities for Sarah and Richard to spend time together outside of work. They would suggest that Sarah attend networking events where Richard would be present, volunteer her for business trips that required working closely with him, and encourage her to stay late when Richard was working extended hours. Sarah started coming home stressed and confused by her colleagues' constant pressure. She would tell me about their conversations and ask if I thought there was any truth to what they were saying about her missing out on opportunities or settling for less than she deserved. I reassured Sarah that we had built a good life together and that wealth was not the most important factor in a relationship. I told her that her colleagues sounded shallow and manipulative, and that their advice was designed to benefit Richard rather than her. But I could see that their constant pressure was starting to affect Sarah's confidence in our marriage. The situation escalated when Richard asked Sarah to accompany him on a business trip to New York. According to Sarah, this was a legitimate work opportunity that could advance her career, but her colleagues immediately began encouraging her to use the trip as a chance to get closer to Richard. Michelle told Sarah that a weekend in New York with Richard could change her entire future. She said Sarah should pack her most attractive clothes, flirt openly with Richard, and make herself available for romantic encounters. The other colleagues agreed and said this was Sarah's chance to transition from employee to girlfriend. Sarah was torn because she genuinely wanted the professional experience but was uncomfortable with her colleagues' expectations. She asked me what I thought about the trip and I told her she should go if it would benefit her career, but that she should maintain professional boundaries regardless of what her colleagues suggested. Sarah went on the trip and came back even more stressed than before. According to her, Richard had made several attempts to turn their business dinners into romantic dates, had suggested they share drinks in his hotel room, and had made comments about how much more he could offer her than her current situation. Sarah said she had maintained appropriate boundaries throughout the trip but that Richard's advances had made her uncomfortable. She was also frustrated because her colleagues immediately wanted details about what had happened and seemed disappointed when she told them nothing romantic had occurred. The colleagues' pressure intensified after the New York trip. They told Sarah she had wasted a perfect opportunity and that Richard might lose interest if she continued to play hard to get. Michelle said Sarah was being foolish to prioritize her marriage over financial security and that she would regret not taking action when Richard was clearly interested. Things reached a breaking point 2 months ago when I discovered a group chat between Sarah and her 4 colleagues. Sarah had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower, and a notification popped up from a group called Sarah's Future. I was curious about the name and looked at the conversation. What I found was months of messages where these women had been systematically encouraging Sarah to have an affair with Richard. The messages were detailed and strategic, with the colleagues giving Sarah specific advice on how to seduce her boss and transition from employee to mistress to girlfriend. Michelle had written long messages about the financial benefits of dating Richard, including access to his expensive lifestyle, potential gifts and trips, and the possibility of him supporting Sarah financially even if their relationship did not work out long term. She said Sarah could always go back to her marriage if things with Richard did not develop as expected. The colleagues had also been sharing information about Richard's schedule, his preferences in women, and strategies for getting his attention. They had researched his ex-wife and his dating history to help Sarah understand what might appeal to him. Most disturbing were the messages where the colleagues discussed how to help Sarah justify cheating on me. They had developed elaborate rationalizations about how marriages naturally evolved, how women deserve to explore their options, and how financial security was more important than emotional loyalty. Amanda had written several messages about how Sarah should think of an affair with Richard as an investment in her future rather than cheating on her husband. She said successful women understood that relationships were strategic and that Sarah's marriage to me was holding her back from achieving her goals. I realized that Sarah had been under constant pressure from these women for months and that they had been actively working to destroy our marriage for their own entertainment and to benefit Richard. I also noticed that while Sarah had not agreed to have an affair, she had not shut down these conversations either. She had asked questions about what her life might be like with Richard and had engaged with the colleagues' suggestions rather than telling them to stop. I took screenshots of the entire conversation and then waited for Sarah to come out of the shower. When she did, I showed her the phone and told her I had seen the group chat. Sarah immediately started crying and apologizing, saying she had never intended to cheat and that she was just confused by her colleagues' constant pressure. Sarah explained that she had been feeling overwhelmed by the colleagues' suggestions and had not known how to handle the situation. She said she loved me and our marriage but that the women had made her question whether she was missing out on opportunities by not pursuing Richard. I told Sarah that I was hurt and disappointed that she had entertained these conversations for months without telling me how serious the pressure had become. I said that while I understood she was being manipulated, she had participated in discussions about cheating on me rather than shutting them down immediately. Sarah begged me to forgive her and promised that she would tell her colleagues to stop their interference in our marriage. She said she realized now how toxic their influence had been and that she wanted to focus on strengthening our relationship rather than listening to their advice. I told Sarah that I needed time to process what I had discovered and that we needed to take action to address her colleagues' behavior. I said that their systematic campaign to encourage adultery was not just disrespectful to our marriage but could potentially constitute workplace harassment. That night, I decided that Sarah's colleagues needed to understand the real consequences of their actions. They had been treating our marriage like a game and encouraging Sarah to make decisions that would destroy our relationship for their entertainment. I realized they needed to see exactly what kind of future they were actually encouraging. I spent the weekend researching Richard's background and his history with women. What I found was disturbing but not surprising. Richard had a pattern of pursuing married employees and had been involved in several workplace affairs that had ended badly for the women involved. His ex-wife had divorced him after discovering multiple affairs during their marriage. 2 former female employees had left the company after relationships with Richard had ended poorly. One woman had even filed a complaint about sexual harassment, though it had been settled out of court. Richard clearly viewed his female employees as potential conquests rather than professional colleagues. He used his wealth and position to manipulate vulnerable women and then discarded them when the novelty wore off or when their relationships became inconvenient. Update 1. After discovering the group chat and learning about Richard's history, I decided it was time to take action. I had spent a week thinking about how to handle this situation, and I realized that Sarah's colleagues needed to understand they were not just playing matchmaker but actively encouraging Sarah to destroy her marriage for a man who had a history of using and discarding women. I asked Sarah to invite her colleagues over for dinner on Saturday night. I told her I wanted to meet these women who had been giving her advice about our marriage and that I thought it would be good for everyone to have an honest conversation about the situation. Sarah was nervous about the dinner but agreed that it might help clear the air. She told her colleagues that her husband wanted to meet them and discuss the workplace dynamics that had been affecting our marriage. To my surprise, all 4 women agreed to come, probably expecting to convince me that Richard was a better option for Sarah. I spent several days preparing for this dinner. I printed out Richard's divorce records, which were public information and showed the details of his multiple affairs. I also found articles about the harassment complaint and gathered information about his pattern of relationships with employees. When Michelle, Jessica, Amanda, and Lisa arrived on Saturday night, they seemed confident and almost excited. They were clearly expecting to convince me that Sarah deserved better than what I could offer and that Richard represented an upgrade for her. During dinner, the women made several comments about our home, our lifestyle, and our future prospects. Michelle mentioned that Sarah was so talented and beautiful and deserved to explore all her options. Jessica commented on how limiting it must be for Sarah to be tied down so young. After dinner, I told the women that I wanted to discuss their advice to Sarah about her relationship with Richard. I said I understood they cared about Sarah's happiness but that I was concerned about the guidance they had been giving her. Michelle immediately became defensive and said they were just being good friends by encouraging Sarah to think about her future. She said I should want what was best for Sarah, even if that meant accepting that she might be happier with someone who could offer her more. That's when I pulled out the printed documents and placed them on the table. I told the women that before they continued encouraging Sarah to pursue Richard, they should understand exactly what kind of man they were promoting. I showed them Richard's divorce records, which detailed his pattern of adultery during his marriage. I explained that his ex-wife had left him specifically because he had multiple affairs with employees and had shown no respect for his marriage vows. The women looked uncomfortable, but Michelle said that Richard's past relationships were not relevant to his potential relationship with Sarah. She claimed that his divorce proved he was now available and ready to commit to someone new. I then showed them the harassment complaint and the information about Richard's former employees who had left the company after relationships with him ended. I explained that Richard had a clear pattern of pursuing married employees, using his wealth and position to manipulate them, and then discarding them when the relationships became inconvenient. Amanda tried to argue that these women might have been lying or trying to get money from Richard. But when I showed them the pattern of behavior spanning several years and multiple women, it became harder for them to dismiss the evidence. I told the colleagues that they had been encouraging Sarah to destroy her marriage for a man who had never maintained a committed relationship with any woman, including his ex-wife. I said they were not helping Sarah secure her future but rather encouraging her to become another casualty in Richard's pattern of exploitation. Jessica finally asked why I was telling them this information instead of just forbidding Sarah from working with Richard. I explained that I believed Sarah was an adult who could make her own decisions, but that she deserved to have accurate information rather than the fantasy version of Richard that her colleagues had been promoting. I also told the women that their months-long campaign to encourage adultery had been documented in their group chat and that their behavior could potentially be considered workplace harassment. I said that systematically pressuring a colleague to cheat on her spouse was not appropriate professional behavior. Michelle became angry and said I was trying to intimidate them and control Sarah's choices. She claimed that Sarah was clearly unhappy in our marriage or she would not have been receptive to their suggestions about Richard. I calmly told Michelle that Sarah had been confused and overwhelmed by months of pressure from people she trusted as friends. I said that constantly telling someone they deserve better and should betray their spouse was a form of psychological manipulation, not friendship. I then shared one final piece of information that I had discovered. Richard was apparently already pursuing another married employee in a different department. According to my research, he had been taking this woman to expensive lunches and had given her jewelry similar to what he had given Sarah. The colleagues were shocked to learn that Richard was simultaneously pursuing multiple married employees. This revelation seemed to finally break through their fantasy about Richard being genuinely interested in Sarah as a person rather than simply looking for his next conquest. Lisa was the first to apologize. She said she had not realized how manipulative their behavior had been and that she had gotten caught up in the excitement of Sarah potentially having a wealthy boyfriend. She admitted that they had not considered the impact on our marriage or the possibility that Richard was not sincere. Jessica and Amanda also apologized, though they seemed more embarrassed about being wrong about Richard than genuinely sorry for trying to destroy our marriage. They said they had thought they were helping Sarah but now realized they had been giving her terrible advice. Michelle remained defiant until the end. She said that even if Richard was not the right choice, Sarah still deserved better than being married to an electrician. She claimed that Sarah was settling for less than her potential and that someday she would regret not exploring her options while she was young and attractive. I told Michelle that her attitude revealed exactly why her advice had been so toxic. I said that she viewed relationships as transactions based on wealth and status rather than love and commitment, and that this perspective had led her to encourage Sarah to betray someone who loved her for someone who saw her as disposable. Sarah had been quiet during most of this conversation, but she finally spoke up and told her colleagues that she was disappointed in their behavior. She said she had trusted them as friends but now realized they had been more interested in drama and excitement than in her actual well-being. Sarah told the women that she loved our marriage and our life together, and that their constant pressure had made her question things that she had never doubted before. She said she felt manipulated and hurt that they had tried to convince her to throw away her relationship for their entertainment. The dinner ended with Michelle leaving angrily and the other three women apologizing again before departing. Sarah cried after they left and said she felt stupid for not recognizing how toxic their influence had been. She promised that she would set clear boundaries with these colleagues and focus on our relationship. Update 2. 3 months have passed since the dinner with Sarah's colleagues, and the aftermath has been both satisfying and educational. Sarah did exactly what she promised and set firm boundaries with her work friends, but the consequences extended far beyond what any of us had expected. The Monday after our dinner, Sarah went to work and told Michelle, Jessica, Amanda, and Lisa that she would no longer participate in any conversations about her personal life or her relationship with Richard. She said she wanted to maintain professional relationships but that their interference in her marriage was no longer welcome. Michelle did not take this well and accused Sarah of being controlled by me. She said Sarah was making a mistake by choosing our marriage over the opportunities that Richard represented. But the other three women seemed genuinely embarrassed by what they had learned about Richard's history and backed down from their previous position. Within 2 weeks, Sarah's observation about Richard pursuing multiple women simultaneously was confirmed in the most dramatic way possible. The other married employee that Richard had been courting apparently decided to pursue an affair with him, encouraged by her own group of colleagues who had been giving her similar advice to what Sarah had received. However, this woman's husband was not as understanding as I had been. When he discovered the affair, he immediately contacted Richard's company with evidence of the inappropriate relationship and filed a formal complaint about Richard using his position to pursue married employees. The company was forced to investigate, and during that investigation, several other women came forward with stories about Richard's behavior. The pattern of him targeting married employees and using his wealth and authority to manipulate them became impossible for the company to ignore. Richard was fired within a month of the investigation beginning. According to Sarah, he tried to claim that all his relationships with employees had been consensual and that the women had pursued him rather than the other way around. But the evidence of his systematic targeting of married women and his use of company resources to fund his personal relationships was overwhelming. Sarah also learned that Richard's financial situation was not as stable as it had appeared. Much of his wealth was tied up in loans and investments that were not performing well. His expensive lifestyle was partially funded by credit and his divorce settlement was still being paid to his ex-wife, leaving him with less disposable income than he had led people to believe. The woman who had actually had an affair with Richard was left in a terrible situation. Her husband filed for divorce and demanded full custody of their children, citing her adultery and poor judgment in having an affair with her boss. She also lost her job when Richard was fired, since their relationship had made her position untenable. Michelle continued to be hostile towards Sarah even after Richard's firing. She apparently blamed Sarah for not warning her about the investigation and seemed to think that Sarah had somehow orchestrated Richard's downfall. Their working relationship became so strained that Michelle eventually requested a transfer to a different department. Jessica, Amanda, and Lisa were more reflective about the situation. They apologized to Sarah again and admitted that they had been naive about Richard's character and intentions. They said seeing what happened to the other woman who had actually pursued Richard made them realize how badly their advice could have damaged Sarah's life. Sarah's relationship with her colleagues taught us both valuable lessons about the influence that other people can have on a marriage. Sarah realized that she had been allowing these women to plant seeds of doubt about our relationship instead of trusting her own feelings and experiences. She also learned to recognize manipulation tactics and peer pressure in professional settings. Sarah said that her colleagues had been skilled at making their terrible advice sound like wisdom and support, when in reality they had been encouraging her to make decisions that would have destroyed her happiness. For my part, I learned the importance of addressing relationship threats directly rather than hoping they would resolve themselves. If I had not discovered the group chat and taken action, Sarah might have eventually given in to months of pressure and made a decision that would have ruined both our lives. The experience also strengthened our marriage in unexpected ways. Having to defend our relationship against outside pressure made us both more aware of what we valued about each other and our life together. Sarah said that comparing our solid, honest relationship to the drama and manipulation surrounding Richard made her appreciate what we had built. We also developed better communication about outside influences on our marriage. Sarah now tells me immediately when anyone makes comments about our relationship or suggests that she should consider other options. We have agreed that our marriage is not open for debate or input from people who do not have our best interests at heart. 6 months later, Sarah received a promotion at work that came with a significant salary increase. Her new boss is a woman who values professional boundaries and has created a much healthier work environment for Sarah and her colleagues. Sarah occasionally runs into Michelle in the office, but they maintain minimal contact. The other 3 colleagues have rebuilt their friendship with Sarah on more appropriate terms and no longer make comments about her personal life or marriage. As for Richard, Sarah heard through office gossip that he eventually found another job but had to take a significant pay cut. His reputation in their industry was damaged by the harassment complaints and his pattern of inappropriate relationships with employees. The whole experience taught us that sometimes the biggest threats to a marriage come not from obvious sources like attractive strangers or relationship problems, but from people who present themselves as friends while systematically undermining the relationship from within. Sarah's colleagues had been far more dangerous to our marriage than Richard himself, because they had been working to change Sarah's perspective and values over time rather than simply presenting her with a one-time temptation. I am grateful that we discovered their influence before it was too late and that we were able to protect our marriage from people who saw our relationship as entertainment rather than something valuable that deserved respect and protection. Our marriage is stronger now than it was before this experience, and we both feel more confident in our ability to handle outside pressure and manipulation. Sometimes the best way to appreciate what you have is to see what you could lose, and Sarah's colleagues inadvertently helped us both realize how much our relationship means to us.